The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame. Last year, while teaching a workshop in Hollywood, I came upon an exhibit of photographs. The images were of life on Hollywood Boulevard during the 70s, a time when the city and the street were a big part of my life. I felt as if I were looking through a window in time, half expecting to see people I knew in front of me. The photography perfectly captured not only the characters, but the feel of the street back in the day. 6 months later, I was introduced to the photographer Ave Pildas while attending Photo LA, and I was soon to discover a photographer who had had an amazing career, not only as a street photographer, but also a photographer of legendary jazz greats, including John Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, and Nancy Wilson. He's also responsible for numerous classic album covers and for years a respected photo educator. As I sat in his studio in Santa Monica, I was treated to the story of a man whose camera had led him to lead an interesting and really creative life. Well, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it, Abe.
Okay, and nice to meet you again. And here we go. Yeah,
I was looking at the breadth of your work. It's really amazing. You know, the street photography, the jazz stuff, the urban landscapes. Beautiful, beautiful work. And as I told you before we started recording, I happened on to an exhibition on Hollywood Boulevard last year while I was teaching a workshop. And I walked in there and I took a look at those photographs, and it just brought a smile to my face, because that was a Hollywood that I grew up with in the 70s, and I hadn't seen that Hollywood in a very long time. So it was really interesting taking students out to photograph on Hollywood last year, knowing how much it's changed, and then yet seeing the Hollywood of my memory right there on the walls.
Well,
just wonderful.
First, thanks for the props, and the Hollywood Boulevard was really dear to me in that time, as I worked just around the corner from Hollywood Boulevard. I worked at Capitol Records for a short time in 1971 as an art director at Capitol Records, which was I would have to say a so-so job. I wasn't ready for Capitol, and Capitol wasn't ready for me. But the biggest problem was that the Beatles broke up 2 weeks after I arrived at Capitol Records. So Capitol Records went into this implosion, and which was really an education for me to see how a big company was run, especially in a crisis situation.
Right.
But after 6 months, I just opened my own design studio. At that time, I had already been taking pictures for years, which was why I was hired by Capitol. I just kind of transitioned from, over a period of years, from design work to photography work, because I couldn't get the kind of pictures I needed from photographers, so I started taking all my own pictures for my design. And then it was just much cleaner to be a photographer than it was to be a designer.
Yeah. When you were at Capitol and working as a designer, even though it was a short period of time, what exactly was that role? What did the job entail?
Well, I got to take pictures of artists, and I got to design album covers. So and some of the album, and I got to deal with the egos of everybody too. So I did a Leon Russell album. I did a Hoyt Axton album, and I worked on the Ram McCartney album. Because he still stayed with it, and a bunch of other ones, and a lot of artists that many people had probably never heard of or never will hear of, even though their albums were released. They weren't promoted, so there were a lot of talented people that I got to be friends with and work with who just never hit it.
Right.
And it's any creative business is kind of a tough business, but like I got to see the inner workings of that, and it's tough for somebody a creative to make an album and go into the studio, put their love into it, and then not have it released, or
right.
have it released and it didn't get any airtime, and the people get depressed and deflated, and then every time somebody plays it, or every time it gets a mention, or if the album succeeds, and everybody's elated. But it's really, I think all creatives are emotional about what they do.
Yeah,
that's part of what makes what they do good.
And during that time, that album cover was really a critical marketing.
It was, and without getting into it, like you could do an album and it could really look great, and then they'd have to pay to have it placed in the right place in the stores, and then they had to pay to get it played on the radio at that time. So it was, there was the creative side where they had the musicians and then there was the business side. And those always didn't come together.
Was it rare for a designer to be a photographer as well as you were?
I think that people who have visual educations, they can. It doesn't matter what tool they pick up if they want to find out something about the tool, whether it's a camera or an airbrush or whatever it is, that they find a way to use that, and be creative with it. In my case, at the time. There were 3 art directors there at the time. The other 2 were not photographers, and they hired photographers. And I hired photographers too. So
how would you come to decide whether or not you were going to shoot or whether you were going to have someone else do it?
Some of it had to do with the budget, and others had to do with my workload, or whether I wanted to use somebody who came to me. And I was new at it, but...
And you'd been photographing musicians way before you started working there.
I think that's one of the reasons why Capitol was interested in me. As a kid well, let me start by saying I'm a failed musician. And it hurts me to say that, but it didn't take me long to figure out that I was never going to be as good as all of the guys who I really liked.
Yeah.
And my mother twisted my arm as a child to play the violin, and I was more interested in playing baseball. So I wasn't a very good violinist. And then in high school, I played a B-flat trumpet. I wasn't particularly good at that. I was more interested. Actually, it went like this. I think it went like cars, sports, and girls, and then then that gets turned around. So sometimes then it goes to girls, cars, and sports, but music didn't fit in, even though I really liked music. And then I started when I got into to art school or design school. I was interested in jazz and always was, and started going to jazz clubs. So, and then a jazz musician that I met who was a young phenom named Eric Kloss, who was a saxophone player who was blind, taught me to play the alto sax. Over the telephone. Over the telephone. I wasn't a very good saxophone player either. About the best I could do was CJM blues with somebody who was much better than I was. But it didn't stop my love for music, and especially jazz, which I still listen to a lot, almost exclusively. I can say that it was a good part of my life and very influential on me.
Yeah, and your images are beautiful. You've shot Coltrane, Monk.
Well, I had a little system, like I wasn't really conscious of other photographers of jazz music, or jazz musicians. And the ones that I did see were mostly backstage shots or candid shots of the musicians in a friendlier situation, not always performing, and not very many of them performing. And I wasn't particularly interested in that because there were people doing that, and I was really more interested in taking pictures of the musicians while they were performing. Mm-hmm. I had a Pentax camera and Tri-X film, and the light was really bad because most of these shots were taken in small clubs in the Midwest. I realized that I needed a really good lens, so I bought a Schneider lens, or a Zeiss lens that was really very fast and had a narrow depth of field, but it was a big metal lens. It was heavy, but I used to set the focus and wait for the musicians to come into focus and then take the picture, because I wasn't fast enough in focusing the camera while they were moving around playing. So that was the way I was able to get pictures that were at least in focus. And then I had to wait for them to be in the light, because I think when musicians are playing, it's a little bit different now. They weren't always conscious of being in the spotlight, or they turn around, or they were into the music. So.
Right. And I have photographed in venues like that, and decades later, the lighting hasn't improved much.
No.
Jazz clubs, they're not considering photographers at all.
No,
in those places.
Concerts are better, and I think that if you have a backstage pass, or you have a pass where you're allowed to get on stage, then it's easier to take pictures. But I took those pictures for about 2.5 years as a stringer for Downbeat Magazine. I think the first couple pictures I took, somebody said, "Oh, those are good pictures," so I sent them to Downbeat, and they said, "Do you want to be a stringer?" And a stringer meant that they gave you a press card, and you could go wherever you want to. And if I took a picture that I liked and I sent it to them, and they used it in the magazine, they'd give me sometimes $5, sometimes $10. If they used it on the cover of Downbeat, then they'd give me $25.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. I wasn't doing it for money. In fact, except for commercial photographer, I was never taking pictures for money. I only was taking pictures for money when I was taking pictures of food and fashion and sometimes industrial, like vice grips. Are things that ad agencies would send me, and that was I'm not complaining about that, and because you have to use your creativity, or architecture. I shot a lot of architecture, so my complaints aren't about not taking good pictures. The pictures were good; they were just always at somebody else's direction,
Right.
Like I had a job to do, and I did the best I could.
Okay. What were the clubs like? Because my only impression of those clubs is what I've seen in movies. And you always see the sort of romanticized version of what those clubs were, even when they're doing these biographic movies on, Coltrane and all these people. But how do you remember those places?
Well, certainly they were dark, and they were, for me, they were exotic as could be. They were always in neighborhoods not where I lived, but in I guess what you'd call mid-city neighborhoods now, but maybe in I would say in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I grew up, the clubs were in the ghettos. I can just remember saying I was going to a particular club, and people in Cincinnati, which is which is a racist town, but and always was and still is. But people would tell me, "Oh, don't go to that club. It's not safe to go to that club." I never had any problems going to clubs. I didn't have an attitude about it. I felt comfortable. It didn't take long for people at the clubs to accept me and what I was doing. My heart was in the right place. I always would make sure that the musicians got prints of what I was taking pictures of, and if they had left town because they were on a circuit, I was able to either pin the photograph up on the bulletin board in the dressing room, so that the next time the guy came around, the musician came around, he could take the picture, or another musician who was going to play with that musician the following week in a different city would take the picture with him. But the best part about that is when they saw the picture, when the musicians coming into the clubs saw the picture on the bulletin board, they'd say, "Whoa, that's a really good picture. Who took that picture?" And then they'd make sure that I came to hear them and take pictures. So it was kind of carte blanche. It was really a very good relationship, you know. Many of these musicians became friends of mine. I knew them, their families, and their kids. And I think that they just thought of me and my camera as my camera was a musical instrument, you know, and they just realized that was the same creative tool that they were using.
And would you often be like the only photographer there, or was it like
the only white guy there? You know, can I say something about Cincinnati, Ohio? Because even though it's my hometown, you know, it has a reputation of having a nasty police force and being very conservative, and it was. And you know, the musicians who came through there were very careful. Cincinnati is right on the Mason-Dixon line. So it was an underground railway city. So there were a lot of crackers who lived in Cincinnati, and if they didn't live in Cincinnati, they lived just across the river in Covington or Newport, Kentucky, which was mafia run at that time. So that there were bust-out joints and whorehouses and liquor being sold to anybody who could pay for it underage. It didn't matter. And that really wasn't cleaned up until, you know, like the late 60s, maybe the 70s, when George Ratterman, who was a backup quarterback to Otto Graham, became the sheriff of northern Kentucky, and he tried to clean up northern Kentucky, which meant a lot of the gangsters from northern Kentucky just moved across the river to Cincinnati. So the musicians, when they came into town, you know, like the police were always looking for them. They knew that the musicians were coming from the East Coast, and that many of them were drug users. So there were always undercover cops in the clubs. And the musicians had to be very careful. Even, you know, it was a big deal if you got caught with a joint, you know, or marijuana. Then you went to jail. I mean, and it was, and you probably got beat up before you got to jail. So that was tough for the musicians. And you know, I think that all the musicians who were heroin addicts, they had a really hard time. They had to be very careful, and many of them got busted and couldn't make their next gig. You know, so it was on the one side it was a terrible environment for musicians. On the other side, it was a great environment because they were on a circuit. So when they weren't playing in New York and they had to go to Chicago for a gig, then they had to make a circuit of Indianapolis, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City. So they were playing in these smaller towns that had a history of music, but also had a history of racial unrest, and you know, just
I sometimes admire artists who aren't photographers, because they're either because of their work ethic or just the way they throw themselves in the work, or there's just something about how they approach whatever their craft is that leaves me very inspired and often very encouraged. Was there one musician who you saw in that light, that even though they weren't a photographer, but they somehow sort of inspired what you were doing with the camera? Oh,
yeah, Larry Rivers is one who I don't have a picture of, but I got to visit him once in New York. But he was a painter and a saxophone player. But one of the musicians who became a really good friend of mine was Al Gray. And Al Gray was a trombone player who played with Basie, but he also had a sextet, the Al Gray, Billy Mitchell sextet. And they were really a driving, most of the guys who played in that group, including Bobby Hutcherson, who's still alive, played with big bands so that they had a lot of power, and as a small group, they had a lot of power. But we spent a lot of time together, and he was a creative guy in writing, and not just. And he was just a regular guy who was a great trombone player. So the musicians I became friends with, they inspired me because they were being creative, but they were just regular guys. There were some who had issues, like everybody, but I had a really good education. My first education was in architecture, so that was 3D. And then as a designer, when I switched to design, I just used to learn to use my hands, so I can draw and I can paint, And it really doesn't matter that I have a camera in my hands. If it wasn't a camera, it would be something else. I would be making something in a shop, or it's just that when I was painting and my mind was always at another painting, and painting was very slow, slow. And my mind was always racing. So it was just became my weapon of choice became the camera, That was the tool, because I could realize the image much faster. Now, as I got more involved with photography and tried to expand what the camera can do, then the results aren't as immediate, because you can edit, then you have an editing process, or you can combine pictures, or you're working on a story where there are many pictures, or it's in the case of Hollywood Boulevard, it isn't just one picture. It was 2.5 years of pictures. So that meant that, I was on Hollywood Boulevard for a long time. Or for instance, I have a 40-year collection, maybe even longer, of animal pictures. So not pet pictures. They're not pet pictures. Right. They're pictures of the relationship of people and animals, or society and animals. That means that we use them in advertising, and we eat them, and we wear them, and we go to the zoos and watch them. And so animals are really part of humans' lives and culture, sort of economy, everything.
I love that series that you did, because I think some of the best photography out there, when you see it, all of a sudden you go, oh, that's right, that stuff is there. And the pictures that you took of like advertisements, or these sort of constructions of animals that are being used to promote something, like a storefront or whatever it is. And it was just like, wow, that is kind of odd. This whole idea that you're in this sort of urban environment where animals are not present, except maybe for dogs and cats. But all of a sudden these sort of wild animals are ever present, but they're man-made, posters or facades or whatever they are. And just the fact that you had an eye for that. And as I see them as a group of photographs, it kind of reveals sort of that odd absurdity of existence in an urban, in a city environment where these animals sort of pervade but are never really seen other than in a zoo, in a cage.
Well, I must admit, I look for things that are unusual, and sometimes they're unusual to me and not unusual to other people. Mm-hmm. And if you get turned on by something, then I think that my responsibility is to sort of capture it and be able to show it to somebody else and say, and a photograph says, "Oh, did you see this? Do you respond to this also, or is it?" And I also have to say that some of the pictures that I respond to or take might be completely off the wall and just fly right by other people, and they don't get it, or maybe I don't get it. Mm-hmm. So it's not always clear. One of the things that I dreaded about or dread about all interviews are somebody's going to ask me who my favorite photographer is. And I'm going to beat you to this because, that's a tough one. There's hundreds of maybe thousands, and they're... and sometimes I remember their names, and sometimes I don't remember their names. For me, it isn't. There are certainly photographers who I gravitate towards because I think they have a body of work where they have a lot of good work, and then there's others whose work I don't respond to, but I know that it's good work, and then there are pictures that I just like it could be a well-known artist or photographer, and I don't get it. So I don't respond to those pictures. So for me, I think that I have a criteria of what's a good picture. So I think I know what is a good picture, and the two things that are important are content and composition, and sometimes you have one or the other, and sometimes you have them both together. Mm-hmm. When they're both together, then I can really say, "Whoa, that's a really good photograph." That doesn't mean I'm not interested in the pictures that have great content, but are I think a good example, the one that comes to my mind is Gary Winograd, who is a street photographer. Gary, and he was from the West Coast here, and Gary was an incredible photographer. He couldn't see very well, so he never really looked through the camera to take pictures unless he was charged with doing that, like on an assignment where he had to get a specific picture. But so he kept the camera set at something that he knew he would get the image, but he had a real sense of what was going on around him. So he could feel what was going on, and when he felt something, he just sort of swung around and took the picture without ever knowing what was in the frame. So his horizon lines are always, like 30 degrees off, or really off, and like he'd get a half a picture in, or somebody's hand sticking in the picture, but the content was incredible. So what he took pictures of was just so spot on about what was going on around him that it didn't matter what the composition was, On the other side, there are people who take beautifully composed pictures and it's bubblegum inside.
And where do you feel you fall between having almost exacting control of your frame and then Gary's sort of loose framing?
Well, I'm certainly on the opposite end of Gary Winograd, except for the content part, But I because of my design education, I'm very conscious of the frame, and I have this habit. So when I was, I think from about 1970, I started, I filed out a negative carrier a little bit so that you could see the frame line. Mm-hmm. And I think that was popular at that time. And that meant when I printed a picture, that was the proof of the frame. And I could also tell which camera I was using, because the cameras, even though the window was stamped in the camera, they got a little nick in them, or they had some handwork done afterwards, especially the cameras that I had. And so each camera was slightly different, so I could see the rounded edge. Sometimes they were a bit more rounded or a bit less rounded. So I knew which camera, and that for me was the proof of frame. When I switched over to digital, I continued that by adding a frame, adding a black line to the picture. As proof of frame. A lot of people don't like that, and it's just a simple black line around there, but I don't like to crop my pictures. And the reason that I don't like to crop them, one of the biggest reasons is that I don't want to have to remember where I cropped the picture. So and I've seen other photographs by other people where, I've seen this photograph before, but it's a little bit different crop this time than last time. Yeah. And when I was shooting commercially, and you give the picture to the client, they crop it however they want. And if it was a commercial job, then I just looked the other way and let that happen. if they hired me to take a picture where they wanted it to be my picture and there were no controls from the client, then on the back of the prints that I gave them, it said copyright in its entirety, including the black border. So then the picture couldn't be used without the black border. Then I was assured that it was going to be the entire frame. But it's a little tricky, and I think now, even though I feel the same way, and I don't like for people to crop my pictures, you know, whenever there's an obstacle thrown up in front of me, maybe because of my age now, you know, just it's the same as when if I ask them if I can take their picture and they say no, I just say, okay, and I go on to, there's another picture to be taken just 2 seconds away. And the same thing if somebody uses my picture in what I think is an inappropriate way, instead of me chasing them or sending them a threatening letter now, I just say, I don't have time for that. I have to get on with it, and I just don't give them a picture the next time.
Yeah.
So I think you learn to fight your battles, as I hate to say that, but you have to do that so that you can get on with the business of making more images.
Yeah. You know, after you left Columbia, you said you started becoming a freelance designer and photographer and doing all this commercial work. And a lot of photographers, when they start doing that commercial work, their personal work gets put aside just because so much time is dedicated to earning a living. And sometimes they're just so tired and burnt out that the idea of picking up a camera is the last thing they want to think about. But a lot of the work that I've seen is your personal work. So were you always with a camera? How did you find time to, you know, dedicate it to the stuff that wasn't commercial, that was the personal work?
Well, there's about 3 questions there. So in the film part of my life, I always had 2 cameras, and I had them strapped to my waist. So there was a color camera and a black and white. They had very similar lenses. They were the same camera. So I think maybe one was a 24 and a 21, or one was a 24 and a 28, and because I like wide angles. And then sometimes I would carry an 85 with me, but most of my camera are the whole picture instead of close-ups. So yes, I would say my personal work suffered. And it was difficult. If I was on a job and I saw something that was not connected to the job, I couldn't change the film out, so then I would have to make sure that the clients didn't get those personal pictures, so there would often be holes in my contact sheets. So, and I wouldn't make sure that I protected those negatives. But, you know, I'm happy for I was happy for the commercial work. It afforded me a living. I could pay my rent and the things that I needed to pay. I only begrudge it in a way now, but in 2008, when I also had a parallel career teaching. In 2008, when I stopped teaching, I took all of the commercial work that I had done. Maybe there's a couple things, like I think I might have saved some food images and a few architecture images. I took all of the transparencies, all of the prints and everything, and I destroyed them. So all of the commercial work I've destroyed for 2 reasons. One is that I didn't want to take care of it anymore, you know, like catalog it or, you know, like archive it. And I also, even though I thought the pictures were good, I didn't feel that they were all of me in there, you know. So, you know, I'm just smiling now while I'm talking. I can remember just standing on the roof out here and taking the transparencies, which were all in either in plastic frames or cardboard, and just trying to fly them off the roof into the alley and watching the cars run over them, and then on the following Thursday or whenever the street cleaner came through, then they were gone. Unless somebody came along and picked them up, it was a relief.
Yeah.
You know, it was a relief.
So let's talk about the work that you did in Hollywood. I think there was a period of about 3 years where you're doing the black and white
Yeah.
work on Hollywood. You described that the commercial work, one of the reasons you parted with it was just because you didn't see much of you in the work. Is that right? Is that
The commercial work was, I mean, I put my energy to it. The composition was there, but how excited can you get by taking a picture of a, I can remember shooting oil wells, or doing some studio photography of an inanimate object, of, a tool for Black & Decker or something, a drill. They wanted pictures of the drill. I think things are more creative now with some companies where you can do something that's really off of the wall.
Right.
But at that time, it wasn't off of the wall. You were hired. There was a day rate. It was, if you were working for an ad agency, they'd give you a plum job where they might send you to. One of my clients was Minolta, so they had a little underwater camera. So you could do it in a fish tank, but they send you to Acapulco with a half a dozen models, and you're taking pictures of their underwater camera taking pictures. Mm-hmm. They would give you that job if the week before or the week after you would agree to take pictures of a Black & Decker drill, or some drill bits. So I'm not saying that the jobs when they sent you out of the country weren't fun. They were fun. They were different for me than, me recognizing something that was unusual on the street, or me trying to do a studio picture of something, of a still life that I set up for me. So there was a schizophrenia there,
Well, tell me about because you have a really interesting series of portraits on Hollywood Boulevard of various characters that look like they were shot around the same area. Tell me about those and why they resonate so much for you.
A technique I used is I would set up a tripod and the camera on the tripod, and I found a set. And on Hollywood Boulevard, there was all these sets. So they were storefronts, or they were the fronts of restaurants, or they were just, the stars on the street were very important, because the walkway is called the Walk of Fame, and it's terrazzo, and it has stars built into it. So the stars have a dark bottom, the floor, and then the walls were often lighter. So it was really set up graphically for black and white pictures in a way. And sometimes there might be a window in the background, or nothing in the background, just a wall, or maybe it was the front of C's Candy, which was also black and white. So mostly I would choose things that were graphic, because that was what resonated to me, and it's part of my education. And then I don't have a problem talking to people on the street. So when a person would come by, I might say to them, "Oh, where'd you get that jacket?" Or, what kind of dog do you have? Or, do you mind posing for a picture, you and your buddy? Or, are you, just whatever. Or sometimes people were just curious what I was doing, because it was Hollywood, and they were sort of used to cameras, especially the older people that were walking on Hollywood Boulevard. And because that was, Hollywood Boulevard was on the turn then, it was fading, and so there was an incredible mix of people there. So there were old bit players, who were still dressing in ties and faded suits, waiting to be discovered. And then there were junkies and hookers. And runaway kids, and just people riding their bicycle by, and just anybody. A really terrific cross section of life was coming through there.
Yeah.
As soon as you start taking a picture of one person, then people come by and they try and photobomb the picture. So some of the pictures are people looking in, and then they become part of the frame, and then they become subjects too, because before they leave, I say, hey, can I take your picture? And I started out by getting releases from everybody, but it just got to be terribly difficult to do that. And I would say more than half of the people were transient to begin with. So getting in touch with them or getting their correct name, that was impossible too. So I just gave that up, and after I had thousands of pictures and I edited them down, I used to travel to Europe every summer. I had a daughter there. I had gone to school there. I took the pictures to Zoom in France in, I guess, maybe 76, which was just after I had taken a lot of these pictures. And Zoom went crazy and published, 10 pages of the pictures.
Wow.
And some of them, I think a couple of them were full page, and then as you got back into the article, they became contact size. So they published hundreds of pictures. After that, it was in a way over for me. A couple other people published some of those pictures, and I put all of the pictures away. I didn't see them for 40 years. And then I guess where you saw the pictures at Lace, Sarah Russin, who is the director of Lace, knew me, and she had just become the director, and Lace was sort of new to Hollywood Boulevard, having the exhibition space, the city exhibition space there. She asked me if I had photographs, and I said, I have the perfect pictures for you. They're from Hollywood Boulevard. So that's how that that show wound up there. Since the life of photographs are so incredible, especially when you start attaching nostalgia to them or history to them. Then they become more valuable. So I made a little catalog for that show, which was, just a simple little book that has 10 pictures in it. Lace offered that to people, if they wanted to buy it. I think they could buy it. I think they sold them for $15. I'm not sure. But somebody, and the money went to Lace. I didn't care about that because Lace is nonprofit space. But somebody sent one of the books to LACMA, a curator at LACMA, and they contacted me, and they bought some pictures.
Oh, nice.
So those pictures of Hollywood Boulevard are in the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. At the same time, the New York Public Library, that has an incredible photo collection. They buy pictures, they display pictures. They were having a show of 175 years of photography, and they contacted me because they had heard about the Hollywood Boulevard pictures. They bought a bunch of pictures and a box set of prints for the library. So I was in that show with really a lot of very good photographers. I was so proud of that. I mean, I was in really good company. So, and I had no idea when I was taking the pictures what I was going to do with them, or what the life of them was going to be.
And it's what I find remarkable about those images, beyond just nostalgia, is the fact that it captures the nature of a city in that particular time. Los Angeles, because of its size and because of the way it's laid out, is very segregated, and you can have communities where people gather socially that reflects that. But Los Angeles at that time, in terms of social centers, Hollywood was it. It was like that, maybe Westwood to some extent, but Hollywood brought together a diversity of people that was unlike anything else that you would have found in the city. And I see that reflected in the photographs that you took there.
That's very true. I mean, they still had music schools there, so there were people who would be carrying their instruments. They had young guys that went there because that's where young girls were. Mm-hmm. So they had that cross section. They had acting schools there, so there were people who were dressed in costume. There were people walking their dogs. There are people doing. I mean, it was just full of life.
Yeah, and families walking down the street like mine, going all the way. Not like now where it's all localized, like on Highland and Hollywood and Highland, but that whole street would just have thousands of people walking up and down the street, especially on Friday and Saturday nights.
Exactly, and it was one of the traditions that still exists there are Halloween. Mm-hmm. So, now the big place is West Hollywood, but there's still a lot of people who go to Hollywood Boulevard for Halloween today, and it was big in the 70s. I found that, there weren't these costumed characters up around what was Grauman's Chinese theater, which was at Highland and La Brea, between Highland and La Brea, where all the activity is now with tourists, people dressed in costume and lots of picture taking. And then at the other end, at Vine, where there's some restaurants and maybe a club or two and some residential, that's where action is today. But in the middle, where most of the pictures I took in the 70s, it has not changed, So it's still seedy. It's still on the turn. Now, some of the restaurants that were there are gone, but now they've been replaced with head shops and probably a couple marijuana shops and some lingerie shops. But the people who walk back and forth are still junkies and addicts and hookers and people looking to get in trouble. So I could just take my camera and my tripod, go to the same locations or similar as I did 40 years ago, and the costumes would change to reflect what people are wearing today, but the types of people are going to be exactly the same, mm-hmm. and the diversity is going to be exactly the same. So
you're still getting out there and shooting. Now you're shooting digital rather than film.
I am shooting digital. Interesting thing that I did. I don't know where you're going, but I thought of something. An interesting thing that I did last 4th of July. Last 4th of July, I took a American flag that I have and I've used it as a prop before, and I took it down to 5th and San Pedro, which is right in the middle of Skid Row. Mm-hmm. And there's a recovery house on that corner, and they have a fence around the recovery house. So I took the flag and I hung it upside down on that corner, on the fence. And the first comments that I got were, "What are you doing? Do you know the flag's upside down?" And that's before I had set up my camera or anything. And I said, "Yeah." There were a couple of vets there who were homeless, and I said, "Yeah, it's a sign of distress." And they said, "How'd you know that?" Because they were a little stoned or out mm-hmm. of it. And I said, "Well, look around. What do you think? Do you think that this place is distressed?" And they said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to take pictures of people in front of the flag. It's the 4th of July. It's a celebration." They said, "Can we help?" So they helped me hang the flag up, and they were stumbling around a little bit. Mm-hmm. They were the first couple guys I took pictures of. Then they one guy, Nick, started recruiting people for me. Hey, can you want to have your picture taken, or and so people would come up and I'd take a picture of them in front of the flag. And the purpose wasn't, I was down there on Skid Row, and it wasn't to take pictures of people shooting up or lying in the gutter. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose was it was the 4th of July, and to just bring some portraiture, to capture who these people were in front of the American flag. They weren't made up or anything. They were just walking by. Do you want to have your picture taken? And so then a woman showed up with an American flag bikini on, and heels, and the top wasn't a halter, it was sort of a blouse, but it was American flag too. I asked if I could take her picture, and she said, will you buy me a bottle of water? And I said, sure. So I gave her $1, because you could go across the street and get a bottle of water for $1. But I took a bunch of pictures, and she got into it. She was posing for the, vamping a little bit to have her picture taken. And then she disappeared after that. I don't know what her name was. 2 minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes later, there she was on the right on the corner there with a bullhorn and a bottle of water, yelling into the bullhorn, "Come get your picture taken, get $1." Come get your picture taken, get $1. It was loud, And in no time, I had a lineup around the block of people wanting to get their picture taken.
Did you have enough dollars?
I did have enough dollars. I had enough dollars because I went to the bank and I got $100 worth of $1 bills, not knowing whether I'd need them or not for whatever.
Yeah.
And they were all brand new, and I just gave them out to people, I haven't, that was in July the 4th. Here it's, 8 months later, I've not printed any of those pictures, but I did make a video from the stills. And,
I saw that. That's very cool.
And so it's a little interesting because it's stop action, and I got I sampled some music, which was Kate Smith, who is probably not known to anybody now, but when I was growing up, she was a pop singer that sang patriotic songs. Mm-hmm. So she was the foremost singer of God Bless America. So I have that as a soundtrack, as these people standing in front of the flag. So I probably will print those as stills because I think individually they have a similarity to the Hollywood Boulevard pictures. Yeah. You can see that some of the people can barely stand, and you can see some of the people are just joyous, standing there, or the family of kids just standing there. They're homeless, they're happy, at least at the moment. It's just about them and the camera. The statement is just the person. The statement. I'm not saying, okay, are you guys living in a tent here on the sidewalk? It isn't that at all.
Yeah, it's about their humanity.
It's about their humanity. Yeah. So, there's some similarities to that.
Well, my last question that I ask each guest is that I ask them to recommend one photographer for our listeners to discover and explore on their own, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Well, 3 of them come to mind. I think Greg Cemento is that?
Cemento. Yeah, Greg Cemento, yeah.
He's I don't know him very well, but he sees the irony in pictures. So I would recommend him. I would also recommend Orville Robinson, mm-hmm. who I don't know personally, but I have a sort of a correspondence with him on Facebook. But I see his pictures all the time, and he's fearless. He'll take a picture of anything, but he's kind of like Gary Winograd in that the pictures they're really good pictures. He lives and works in New York, and he takes pictures of what's going on the street. And then a young friend of mine who I do know very well, David Valera, who is quite some years my junior, who's a very talented photographer.
Great. Well, the first 2 I've had as guests on the show.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, no, that's great. So for people who are listening now, if they have the app, they can do a search and listen to those interviews. And David is a friend and someone I probably will have on the show sometime soon. So surprise, David. Get ready.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
No,
David.
thank you. It was a pleasure for you to be here and for me to spend some time with you.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Ave for joining us on The Candid Frame. You can check out his work at avepildas.com. And thank you for your continued support of The Candid Frame. If you haven't already, please take the time today to write a review in the iTunes Store. Your ratings and comments help people to discover the great conversations like the one you heard today. Thanks to Roland Matos, Rob Jenkins, Packy Dragon, and Jeffrey Allen for their 5-star reviews. You can also support the show by making a regular monthly contribution through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or you'll find a link in the show notes and the Candid Frame website. Or if you just want to make a one-time contribution to the show, you can do so via PayPal by clicking on the donate button on the Candid Frame website or the show notes. Thanks to all of you who have recently contributed to the show, including Luis Felipe Bento and George and Jane Rose. Thanks for believing in us. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS, Android, and Windows. Links for each can be found in the show notes and the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @IbarianX. Remember to help spread the word. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.